right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today titled Global Talent, Local Success, Hiring Right in a Competitive Market. This webinar is Rehman Sheriff Group in collaboration with Integrated People Solutions, and we're really excited to be talking about today's topic. It's so important, especially because there is such a large labor skills shortage in Australia. So today we'll talk about how to navigate the hiring process for whether that be local talent or overseas skilled workers. And today we've got with us Maya Trepevska from Integrated People Solutions. Thank you, Maya, so much for attending today's webinar with us.
Welcome.
She is the Director of Integrated People Solutions with over 15 years of experience in guiding companies through workforce planning and international recruitment. And today I will be your host. My name is Flora Din. I am the associate lawyer here at the Rehman Sheriff Group, and I specialize in immigration law and also skills acquisition. So big welcome to all of you here today. Right, so I will now start with letting Maya speak about Integrated People Solutions.
Thank you for that, Flora, and I'm excited to be here today. We've spent quite a bit of time over the last couple of months working on some projects together, so what a great opportunity to do today and share a little bit about what we can do together. But Integrated People Solutions is focusing on enhancing efficiency compliance and how we go through workforce development and looking at tailoring strategies for each client. And we look at optimizing those talents, so reducing the turnover, boosting the productivity, and everything else that it takes to run a business. We'll get into the next slide.
Thanks for that, Maya. And just a little bit about the Rehman Sheriff Group. So we are an Australian law firm. We specialize in immigration law and skills acquisition. So any of the skilled workers visa, any of the national innovation visas, or even partner family visas, relative visas, we all work on. So we have a diverse range of visas that we actually take care of. And we also work with global networks and businesses and have a highly skilled labor database that we use to connect individuals with certain businesses in Australia that are struggling to meet the labor skills shortage. Lastly, we do some inbound services in the UAE as well. So we support international expansions or businesses that want to move or relocate to a different location, whether that be to the UAE or to Australia. Now, today's webinar objectives, we will cover a couple of topics. Firstly, we will speak on educating on the employer-sponsored visa streams and strategic selection. We will then explain some of the key compliance obligations that actually link immigration, but also fair work in Australia. We will talk about the visa pathways that turn into scalable, compliant, and business growth drivers. And we will talk about some best practice recommendations that you can use for your business in the HR realm. Some of the purpose and values that we'd like to cover for RSG is integrity, respect, responsibility, and excellence. So at RSG, we focus on honesty and transparency. I think a lot of you, if you've worked with us before, you'll know that we never promise something that we can never deliver. We also value diversity, so treating everyone with dignity and honoring different perspectives as well, that be in the workforce, but also with the clients that we work with. And taking ownership of our actions is very important. So, collaboration with other businesses, collaboration with our clients. We are one to always take accountability for the impact and the commitments that we make with everyone that we work with. And lastly, we always strive for the highest standards of quality, performance, and continuous improvement. Now, I'll let Maya speak on integrated people solutions, mission and vision.
Yes, so thank you, Flora. And from what we've seen, absolutely, I can say the transparency, the collaboration has been one part that has got us here to where we are today. And I think we've done some great work together. So, and how we've done it at Integrated People Solution is looking at the people side. So, looking at the solutions that we can provide our customers. But our vision is creating a future where managing people is not just the complexity side of it. It's making it easy, compliance, and stress-free for them to make sure the workplaces are happier and more productive. In terms of our values, we align into integrity, we maintain high standards, reliability. We're dedicated to provide you top tier consulting services and the quality. We want to make sure that you get not only the best practice advice, but you get the advice that you need to make sure whether it's an employability space or a contract space, we've got the opportunity to make sure you get quality results.
And I think that's why we work so well together, Maya, because our goals and core values actually align. And even on top of that, when we work together, it goes beyond those core values as well. So, yes, love the work that we've done so far. So I guess we can start, Maya, if you could tell us a little bit about why you believe sponsoring workers actually helps in, human resource planning or recruitment processes.
Yes, absolutely. So for us, it's more about addressing the critical skill shortages in the industry. We find that having talent is one thing, right? We all, sometimes you look at it, there is so much people than there is jobs. And then in terms of job quality or candidate quality, we're not necessarily always finding the Australian talent that can fulfill those roles. So looking at sponsoring workers for those particular industries that have skill shortage is important. And it's critical because a lot of the time the transferable skills that you find, especially in quite difficult, complex and challenging type of roles that, with an administrator, you might be able to find in-house talent and domestic talent. But when they become more skilled, they become more specialized. That's when you need to seek out the global talent pool. And that's what keeps it innovative. It makes it competitive. You learn to bring a lot of different caliber and characteristics of people to Australia as well. And obviously, it's overcoming that local labour shortage from either permanent or temporary hires. You know that you're going to be having an employee there for a minimum of 3 years at any given time, right? If you're sponsoring them. So you've got the quality of a candidate, you've got the reliability of a person, and you've got their willingness. What I found is to grow and learn. They are very thankful for the opportunities that they have in terms of being sponsored and being part of for a business. And I love the diversity. I tend to speak a lot, about the diversity, the cultural aspects of it. You're retaining some really good talent around there, and it gives you that competitive advantage. As we know, even RSG, you have so much diversity being in so many different countries that gives you an opportunity to have the best talent.
Yeah. And Maya, what about, I guess, some questions around sponsors who are hesitant to sponsor workers? Or employers that are hesitant to sponsor workers because they see it as a favor that they're doing for the visa applicant. From your experience,
Mhm.
is that the case?
You get a mixed bag of employers. Absolutely, that's a generally mentality where the fear of unknown comes into play. So especially if it's an older workforce, they've never really had to think about or consider an opportunity to sponsor someone. I think that's where our education and our discussions are about. Well, look, if it's a really good talent and you found that talent that ticks, say, 90% of those boxes, or even if they don't tick absolutely all, it's what kind of transferable skills can they bring to you, but also what can you teach them? And then in time, that generally turns people around. But essentially, a lot of the business owners that I've met with, or businesses out there, they are really interested in the quality of that person and the knowledge and experience they already bring to the table.
Mhm. And I know it's a big chunk of money when you're sponsoring a worker as well. Do you see that being translated into, a positive investment for the future, or what has been the feedback from the businesses that you've worked with?
Well, absolutely, I would say yes, they do, for the fact that you could consider if you were to hire a talent in this space, very similar, a like for like in that particular position. Now, you might have salary uh, requests at a lower demand for that particular replacement role, for example, if you were to look to replace that. But then you got to think of, well, if I've got my sponsored worker or the person that I'm looking at sponsoring, I've got their salary and I'm happy paying them that salary. A way to, I guess, show you the support, the opportunities, and the growth component, the employer looks at that extra amount that is on top of that salary for that particular worker. And it's worth the investment rather than recruiting. And it could take 3 times the cost of a
Yeah.
re-recruit.
Yeah, definitely. I can agree with that, definitely, Maya. And I guess that takes us to our next point about, how do we do the workforce planning? What is the strategic way to do that? And what's some of the role definitions?
Yes, so with the strategic workforce planning, the role requirements or making sure that the genuinity of those roles is quite important to make sure we've got the genuine need. What kind of assessment have we done to consider the role requirements and the genuinity? When I talk about that, it's not, oh, let's just find it in the ANZ SCO occupation definition and see if they fit in there. It's actually, well, I've got this skill. I know that again, the cost to replace this particular role could cost 3 times the amount. But looking at, okay, the type of job description we're putting together for it, are they actually fulfilling the duties of that particular position, or what they consider as a genuine validation of a position? um, and seeing how best it aligns to that. And one thing I've seen where businesses have not probably thought about the requirements for that particular role. So they might cover, say, 70 or 80% of that role requirement, and they're like, oh, I didn't even think that that kind of duty actually fell into that role. So was it that someone else was potentially doing it, or they didn't even have that as a plan? And then it became a way to think about, okay, well, what's next to help grow this position as well? So that's been interesting. And the workforce forecasting. So, what is the current skill that you have? What is the potential skill that you can achieve out of that? Is quite important to think about, and when you want to plan to do this. So, we all know, Flora, sponsoring someone doesn't happen overnight or with a click of a finger.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time, effort, and dedication. It takes the pre-work to think, okay, what is it? If I'm considering this as a position and as part of our future growth, is what is that next phase of, if I end up sponsoring this person, what else do I hope to achieve out of that skill of that person? What parts are transferable? What parts need to be educated and grown from there?
Mhm. And do
The
you often,
Sorry,
sorry,
yep.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say recruiting to the company goals. So what I like to do is, okay, what is your workforce plan? So workforce forecasting versus workforce plan are considered as different. So your plan is, I might recruit 5 people this year in my business. As part of that, when do I plan to recruit? We've got one going on, Flora, together at the moment. We said, okay, we'll touch base in September to see if that person's visa requirements have been met. Is it within that particular time frame, or do we need to push out the potential start date for an extra couple of weeks because it's might have its own complexities with it? So it's just making sure, when do I want to recruit and how do I recruit? I plan for that recruitment requirements to meet the sponsorship requirements, because it does take 30 or 21 days, 30 days. Best practice is to make sure that obviously we've got a job ad posted out. Do they still become the best candidate for that particular role? Do we have other candidates that could potentially support this role? There's very different facets of when you're considering the recruitment or sponsoring that particular person that is already in your company. Did you want to add to that, Flora?
No, go.
No?
I'll just let you finish, Maya.
Yeah, cool. And then the business case. I always talk about, okay, what's the justification for the sponsorship? I like my employers to put together, or my managers to say, well, I plan, this is what I would like to do, how it is affected. Almost give me a business plan, a miniature version of a business plan, so we have a better understanding. Your when, how, why, the expectations, what are you hoping to achieve out of that, and where is the value to the business. And the value might be that they're a highly skilled person. The value might be they've opened up a new door for something that the business didn't know that they can do. I think a lot of time businesses don't see that as a opportunity or a route to go through, rather than, like we mentioned, the question you asked before, is that something I just do just to satisfy the person rather than the business? But it is the genuine need. So we just want to make sure that everything at IPS is that we get you audit ready to why and how, and then obviously work with RSG to make sure that we tick all the boxes before we get to the next steps of the sponsorship process.
Yeah, I think that is so important, aligning the recruitment with company goals, because constantly, sometimes I find that companies are always worried about delays, like processing delays at the Department of Home Affairs, and whether or not an employee will be granted their visa. But it's just all about working around, what visa are they currently on? Are they onshore? Are they offshore? And then if you can't find local labor for that entire time period anyways, it would be better to just start with the sponsorship, and then by the time that time frame passes, then you'll have an employee that's ready to start with you and ready to work the next 3 years with you, rather than still not being able to find the labor, the skilled labor that you need. So I think, yeah, that's definitely very important, Maya.
Cool. Glad I can help.
And then I guess we will speak a little bit about how to prepare for a sponsorship. I think Maya's already touched some points of this already. So conducting labor market testing just to advertise through these platforms, just to see if there are any local labor that you can fill these vacant roles in. After you've done the 28 days of advertising, if nobody else is a better fit than the visa applicant, then you can then lodge a nomination and visa application. So the position does need to be on a skilled occupation list. It's now combined. So it used to be a short term and medium term and a regional list. Now everything is basically combined into one, and it's called the core skills occupation list. The position does need to be full time, and there is a threshold. So it's the temporary skilled migration income threshold that has been increased to 76,515 as of July 2025. And the AMSR threshold is what's called an annual market salary rate. So the visa applicant not only needs to meet the minimum thresholds, but also needs to meet the annual market salary rate. So for example, if the average engineer in Australia was making about 85,000 per year, then the 76,000 wouldn't be the thresholds you would choose. It would be the annual market salary rate because it's higher. So it just needs to be the minimum of what we call it the TISMIT. But then if you do research and the annual market salary rate is higher, then it's important that it meets that instead. Supporting salary evidence. So things like whether the company is able to afford this visa applicant for the next 2 or 3 years, proposing a commitment that you're going to employ them for the next 3 years. It needs to show that the business is running, lawfully operating, and just ensuring that the salary can be met. And then perhaps I can let Maya speak on internal recruitment records and interview notes, because those are very important and probably a lot of what you do, Maya.
Yeah, so if I can also touch on the one before, the salary evidence, one thing that we like to do as part of, I guess, the TSM is more about the benchmarking and making sure that, like you said, those ranges are not just, hey, we're going to look at recruiting them on the quickest and the most cheapest way. It's actually, what does that position look for? What does it stand for? How does that labor market testing look like? And then with the salary evidence, making sure in terms of an employment contract, we have that, whether we've got them on a fixed term full-time or a permanent full-time basis, to recruit them and show that what's included in that salary. Is it a 38-hour week? Is it whereabouts is it located? What's included in that salary? Are there any other additional benefits that make that salary? The internal recruitment records and notes is the most important, especially when it comes to finding the right talent. And even if someone was to ask you, well, I'd love a copy of what I've done in terms of my recruitment. So fun fact is they can actually ask for a copy of the notes. But in terms of recording evidence, it's important for the visa application process. So have we got a phone screen record? Have we got an interview record from the discussions we've had? And then a first and second round interview, and any other kind of discussions you've had regarding their potential proposed recruitment, any kind of emails. I keep all my email trails that I've had regarding that sponsored or the person that we're looking at sponsoring, just because we're all on the same page. And if we've had to have a revisit from immigration, we've got all of those documentations in play.
Yeah, and that's very
So
important.
I'll ask you, Flora, maybe if you could touch on the next points about the pathways that we can look at in sponsoring people.
Yeah, for sure. I can go through because there are a couple of different pathways for visas. But it is important to note, earlier that you mentioned on the recruitment records, because then we talk about compliance later, employer compliance, but also sponsor compliance as well. So looking forward to talking about that. So some visa options that are available for these employers that are willing to sponsor their employees is the 482 skills in demand visa. This is a very common visa. We work with these visas a lot. Maya and I have done a couple together as well. So, we've been able to see the benefits for the business, but also the benefits for the visa applicants and kind of know inside and out. I mean, Maya's basically a lawyer at this point. She knows the ins and outs of a skills in demand visa. But the other option would be the employer nomination scheme, and that's the 186 visa. The 186 visa is a permanent resident visa. So the stakes are a bit higher, the requirements are higher. English test is the required score is higher. The work experience, you need 3 years full-time experience rather than the 1 year on a 482 visa. So it's for those individuals that have many years in the industry that they're working in and qualifications, because it requires a skills assessment as well. So, but then we also have another stream under the 186, which is the transition stream. So that would be once the visa applicant has been on a 482 visa for more than 2 years, or at least 2 years working in that nominated occupation, they will then be eligible for the 186 transition stream. So the transition stream is a little bit more lenient on certain requirements. So for example, skills assessment is not required. So it just basically allows a visa applicant to be on a 482 and then transition to a permanent resident visa. Then we've got the subclass 494, which is a skilled employer sponsored regional visa. these visas are also a provisional permanent resident visa, and it's for individuals who are currently working and living in a regional area. They also need work experience and a skills assessment as well. Um, and they, on this subclass 494, after being on it for 4 years, you're basically granted automatic permanent residence. So it's not like the 482 where you have to prove that you've been on the visa for 2 years. The 494 is basically your provisional permanent residency status already. For the business itself, it's becoming a standard business sponsorship. So having a license for the next 5 years to allow the business to be able to sponsor as many employees, skilled migrant workers, as can be justified at the business. So if the business is, operating and has a really high annual turnover, they'll be able to justify maybe sponsoring 10 employees. Whereas a smaller or medium-sized business who's not having too much of a high turnover, can sponsor 2 or 3 workers. So it just really depends on the size of the business. And it depends on, when we do your assessment and we assess the company financials, how long you've been operating for, whether there's any adverse information. We have to assess all of those things to see how many workers you can actually sponsor at the business. And there are other things as well about biased recruitment practices, which the Department of Home Affairs really tries to work on ensuring that businesses are not biased when they recruit people. So it's just based on skills, and rather than based on the country that you come from, or based on only doing sponsored employees. Now, choosing the right visa will be based on occupations demand and skills gaps. So a lot of the occupations on the skills list, sometimes people have a different title to their roles, and they don't realize that their responsibilities and duties actually meet another occupation that might be on the core skills occupation list that we can match up. And therefore, they will be able to be sponsored, or certain occupations are available for regional areas that might not be available for the bigger cities, like the major cities. And then it's about long-term and short-term workforce needs as well. So how long does the company want to retain this employee? Do they want to do 2 years on the 482 and then transfer over to the 186, or do they want to go directly into the 186? Just really trying to balance the pathway that would be beneficial to both the employer but the employee as well. So at RSG here, we provide legal advice, and IPS ensures that we are aligning that legal advice with the HR planning and the recruitment services that are needed to make your business operations more efficient. And
I was going to say, Flora, did you want to touch on, I guess, there's such a huge list in terms of the occupation demand. I think from what I've seen, there's so many different industries, there's so many different positions, and for employers online today, is if you've got the right talent and you're going to struggle finding a local market person to be able to do that, consider it. I think that to an extent there was teachers, there was some sort of plumbing, and there was some random things that I had seen that I thought, wow, I can't even believe it's got to this component and this extent where you could potentially sponsor different kind of industries and roles that are not necessarily have been part of the skills occupation list originally.
Yeah, a lot of those occupations are really, you're right, Maya. There's some of them are like odd occupations that you wouldn't even think about, being on the skilled occupation list. I was just talking to a client the other day, and they the definition of skilled worker just always seems like the higher occupations. I don't know, like doctors or nurses or you know, dentists, things like that. But in Australia, you know, a plumber is considered a skilled worker. Teachers is considered a skilled
Yes.
worker. There are so many occupations out there, and rightfully so. They should be considered skilled workers because if you are good at what you do, practically with your hands, you know, with your mind or with legal advice, you know, you should be considered a skilled worker. And Australia is in need of that, even in the horticulture
Mm.
industry. So farm workers, you know, aquaculture industry as well. So there are lots of different skill levels that ANTSCO provides. So from level really skill level 1 to skill level 5, and there are just occupations at each skill level. So we can always find an occupation, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And on that note, we will then talk about compliance and employer obligations. So, you know, certain things about if you nominate a person for an occupation, what they have to do, or what record keeping. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, Maya.
Yes. As we say, record keeping, and I always say if it's not written down, it hasn't happened, or we don't have documented evidence, so we can't use it. Even if you told me that through verbal conversation 2 years ago, as long as you've given that in an email setting or a record where it can be recorded and noted. Something even as simple as I've got a diary note, and the diary note was on this particular date, X number of years ago. Take a photo of it, email it to yourself, or just write that as an email. I always say to my clients is, hey, if you don't want to send it to yourself and you find that awkward, send it as an email to me, just so we've got it on record. But with whatever we do, it's making sure that we've got it for at least 5 years. So it could be done for auditing purposes. So essentially, that would be from as I mentioned before, the phone screening conversation, the interview notes, the employment contract that we've got with them, pay slips, or if there's any kind of allowances or payments that were made to that particular sponsored worker. You've got that in your filing system. I love telling people you need to audit and inspect, making sure whether it's um, the documents, whether it's the person, checking in on them, saying, "Hey, how are you finding? Since we've looked at we've sponsored you now. What have you done since then? Are you more aligned to the type of roles and duties? Not just saying that we've got it just so we can sponsor that person, but making sure they're actually doing those tasks. But just like I said, just having those email notes to the employer or to the person saying, hey, great meeting you today, seeing how you're going. Just wanted to pass a note to make sure that we are on the same page. This is what we covered today. That just an audit space from there. Giving timely notifications. So if there's any changes that occur, whether that person's moved, whether there's a change to their visa conditions for whatever reason, even to the point if they've got a new partner and they now need to fall under that particular visa, having to be able to transfer them, say they're from a different country and then moving to Australia as part of that sponsorship, they would need to have that timely notification, especially to RSG as the people that are handling the sponsoring, but also to immigration as well. And people tend to forget about training. Training is a really important part of no different to when you are onboarding a staff member, making sure they're trained and inducted the right way. But how are they integrating into the business? How are they dealing with it culturally? Remember, we have so many different cultures in the world, especially in Australia. We're one of the biggest multicultural countries in the world. So from an employability perspective, how do we integrate that person into the culture? Um, some mum once taught me is a different countries say if you tap them on the shoulder versus tap them on the head, it's inappropriate. Even if you're just trying to say hi, how are you, and touch them, they could be seen as different. Something that's not in their cultural requirements. So it's really important, even as a business owner or as an employee, to know that that is really important to understand their needs culturally. And make sure you're not discriminating. So sometimes as part of the recruitment process, whether you are considering someone and you ask, am I legally authorised to work in Australia? And they say no. Do you dismiss them, or do you consider, okay, well, this person actually can be part of my recruitment plan and my strategy to onboard them and the potential sponsorship because they have so many key criteria that we're looking for? And the biggest question is, can I recover those costs from the worker? Because I've now paid for that. I've heard that so many times, thankfully not with my clients, but around discussions, or I've had to experience people that had been sponsored by their employer saying, well, my employer's actually asking me for money back. And I said, no, they can't ask you that. That's such an illegal thing to do. So if the employer is paying for the sponsorship of that worker, you want to make sure that the company is fully committed and aligned to actually making that payment on behalf of that worker. Yes, it's a costly exercise, but it's a cost that the employee is willing to, as I mentioned earlier on in our webinar today, is to consider as part of that adjustment to that salary potentially, right? So making sure that they don't recover any type of monies from that particular employee.
Yeah, it's interesting you touched on workforce integration, because earlier in a previous slide you mentioned how much you love diversity, Maya. So how do you basically reassure employers? Because I know some employers have that concern of, well, if they're coming from a different country, they might have a different work culture. So how do we bring them into our workforce and integrate them into how Australians do things?
It's a great question. Employers need to be educated, as we all do, right? Especially, I love taking, and I encourage the employers to do this, is taking that person out, whether on the first couple of days of their employment, and just talking about, okay, tell me a little bit about your where you've come from, how do you work overseas? Obviously, that would hopefully be part of a recruitment or a second round interview conversation that you do ask. But if you haven't asked that question, is setting those expectations. So as part of the induction, I will say, okay, well, this is how this particular company would run. And these are the key elements to that business. So they've got how's the code of conduct? What are the standard expectation? What are the hours of work? What is it even sometimes to the dress standard, right? Because everyone has such a different thought process of how to dress at work sometimes. Some businesses like to work outside. I think a couple of months ago, I had someone in the APAC region, and they were in a space, and I thought, is that your where you work? I was amazed to see it was an environment that was almost semi in an office and semi outside. It almost looked like they had a bench outside to work from. And I went, okay, well, that's not going to work for us. You need to make sure you've got the reliable internet, reliability of being able to be contacted. But also, this is the expectation. You need to be in an office. You need to be at a desk. Talk about the ergonomic components of that, how they set up. They're not set up on the side of the bed, right? Or somewhere where they can kick up their feet. They need to actually be in a physicality of a desk. So that's really important as part of that onboarding process of that worker, and then setting those expectations. And it's quite interesting to see what you find through conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Just that transparency again, and through conversation, if the employee is clear about what they need and the employer is clear about the standards that are required for work, that's a very, very positive exchange there. And you mentioned earlier about timely notifications. That is also so important for both the sponsor and the employee. I've had clients who have come to me before who have not changed their relationship status in their visas or in their expression of interest, and then gets an invitation, and then their invitation becomes invalid because they don't have the same number of points as they did originally when they applied, or so it's really hard when you forget to notify the Department of Home Affairs of changes, and then once you've lodged or submitted a document that is kind of contradicting what you originally said, the department will then be skeptical and wonder why you didn't either notify them, or just be skeptical that you might be lying in a future visa application. So that think remembering to notify the department is so important so that it doesn't come off as you hiding a certain situation or hiding a scenario that, doesn't really have a large effect on your visa. And then on top of that, there are some equivalent worker terms as well that sponsors need to consider when they're employing these visa applicants. And Maya, maybe you can talk about those employment conditions and also how it, I guess, relates to fair work in Australia as well.
Yes, so those are specifically when we're looking at the non-monetary benefits, it's something like the internet, as I mentioned just before, like really looking at what does that need, their mobile phones, they become more of an allowance that we end up giving it to them rather than a here it is as part of your salary. Even the travel is another thing that I've seen. And the most interesting one to date has been rice, a rice exchange between employer and employee. So
Wow.
yes, and so they become part of the terms that weren't necessarily an, something, again, from an Australian perspective, not something that we would consider. And then you've got different versions of health insurance, and there's a list of things that you would need to consider that aren't necessarily as part of that salary, but an add-on option that you could give to that worker as well.
I'm really interested, Maya. How did that rice conversation come about? I'd love to know about this.
It came about looking so something that was a standard in their previous employment overseas was something that they were traditionally thought. I So they went, okay, well, this is what I used to get at my employment in my previous country. Now I'm transferring to Australia. And as part of what we used to get is rather than a monetary benefit, we would get rice.
Oh, wow,
So
that's really interesting.
and we learn things all the time. I think, Flora, you and me have had some cases where we think, wow, where did that even come from
Yeah,
as a thought process? But we don't see that in every other country. So it's
yeah.
interesting to see.
Talk about cultural diversity. That is very interesting.
So touching on the employment conditions side, so the Fair Work compliance, we need to make sure it's above the minimum pay. Not just above the minimum pay of the sponsorship requirements, but the minimum pay from a Fair Work perspective. I think there was one scenario where just hitting the crossover between June and July's wages. There had a situation where we had seen the minimum pay just ticked over the same of the award requirements. So just making sure that you double check those award conditions. Um, and what are the equivalent terms and conditions? If we were to give it to an Australian worker versus a sponsored worker, they should be absolutely almost identical in terms of what's on offer. I say almost identical because you might, for the sponsored worker, give an additional benefit as part of the recruitment process, or vice versa for the Australian employee. The National Employment Standards, I love to call them the 10 Commandments, now almost at 11 and growing, but it's what are we giving standard expectation? Are they getting annual leave, sick leave? Are they entitled to long service leave once they are continued to be employed, as well as making sure if there's any, if that sponsored worker ends up being here long term, the other conditions, other leave conditions, domestic violence leave, parental leave is not something that they would be able to be eligible for because they're not a permanent resident or a citizen, but there's got all the other components to make sure that they fall in line with that. As I mentioned before, award compliance with anything that we do, we need to make sure it's better off overall above the award or hitting onto the award. Where I always say better off above the award is because at any given time, say around March, July, and September, award changes tend to occur around that period. So making sure if I'm putting someone on that sponsorship, am I still going to be above all those potential 3 months to look at? As I said, the leave entitlements, what are they? They should be better off, no different to an Australian worker. And the workplace safety and the psychosocial safety. we tend to not talk so much about that, but their mental health, their well-being, their ability to be in a safe workspace. As I said, being on a couch and working is not a safe workspace. Making sure they have the desk, the chairs, do they need a printer? Do they need a copier? Do they have the right internet? They're not they don't have a dial-up connection and the cords are hanging around them. So, I mean, that's a bit of a far stretch, but just making sure that they've got all what they need around them. And just making sure that we are constantly checking. And if you're not sure of that, reach out to RSG or myself at Integrated People Solutions to be able to support you with those kind of updates to make sure that you're compliant. Flora, I was going to say we tend to do that anyway, but if they've heard some new news or information that's coming out or potential changes, and you want to be on the front foot, it's fantastic for you to come to make sure that you're on top of everything, you're confident, you're compliant. So yeah, we're here to help.
Yeah, so important because I feel like compliance, sometimes people always say, oh, but we didn't intend to not comply with our visa obligations, or we didn't intend to not comply with our sponsorship obligations. But that negligence or that forgetting or just your reasoning of, yeah, but we didn't know is not good enough anymore in today's age, not good enough for the department, not good enough for anybody who's looking at, your obligations as sponsorship. So those are proactive duties that you need to ensure you're doing them. And so
I'll ask you, I guess, what happens if the risk component of it? How do we look at mitigating those risks?
yeah, lots of those risks comes in forms of, penalties, Maya. So either penalties or cancellation of sponsorship status as well. So, I mean, as an employer, even without the sponsorship status, you have all of these regulating bodies to ensure that you're providing a fair workspace for your employees and treating them on fair terms and conditions. But as a sponsor, those requirements are also there, and if not, even you're even more at risk of getting that sponsorship status, revoked, or preventing you from ever being able to sponsor another employee. So if it's working well for your business, it's always important to, speak to RSG or speak to IPS and understand what those obligations are in immigration law, but also in employment law as well, and just how that fits into your HR planning. Because some of these civil penalties, as you can see on the slide, it goes up to 93,900 for individuals and 469,500 for body corporate. So these are huge amounts. And when it says individuals, it's talking about individuals who are in, in I don't know, either a director position, in a recruiter position, in a position where you are supposed to be keeping record of all these employees or keeping record of visa conditions. So it's so important because even though you work for the business, you're also liable as an individual in a position that high as well. And then there is reputational damage with the inside of the industry. So there is a page that when your sponsorship has been revoked, it gets published on a public website and everyone has access to it. So they're able to see, why your sponsorship was revoked, what kind of penalties you incurred, and whatever came out of that situation as well. And then it's also a lose-lose situation for the visa applicant, but also for the employer sponsor. The visa applicant has a risk that their visa will be canceled by the Department of Home Affairs, and then that means that the business also loses this employee who has probably been working well for the business, and you've as a business have invested the money that was costly for the visa. So it might be such an unfortunate situation where you're just not keeping on top of things or not keeping on top of the changes in the sponsorship obligations that might lead to these cancellations. And that's why I definitely echo what Maya said. You have to keep on top of it. Immigration laws, employment laws are constantly changing all the time, and it doesn't matter what time of the year it is. They will release changes to these regulations and policies. So very important to keep on top of it. I guess we can get into the case studies now, Maya. Excited to talk about some successful stories that we've both experienced.
Yeah, so as you know, we do quite a bit of work together. We thought I'd share a local shortage experience. So where we looked at how we can potentially look at sponsoring this particular person, we looked at what's the approach we want to do, what's part of that plan. So it's not just, hey, we've decided today we're going to wake up and we're going to sponsor that person. No, we didn't do that. We said, okay, what does it take in order to plan for this potential sponsorship? But first of all, we needed to understand the business case. What is it that we've got in terms of workers? What is it that we need in terms of that particular position? Because everything really falls down to that position that we need. As nice as everyone can be, if we don't have the role or the position for that person and the duties and responsibilities, we need to make sure that they fit into that plan of that business. The policies that the company has, people think it's just a nice piece of paper to have. You actually need to align them to them. Do the sponsored workers have an idea of what your standard expectations are? Do they comply already if they've already been an employee of the business with your current policies? Or like I always look at, okay, how much does this person really focus on our business and the growth of that particular business? If they're just sit there and I always look at if they're sitting there with a jacket and you owe me this because I've been here for X number of years supporting you, that's the wrong mentality for those particular workers. But what we've had is really good candidates that have come in, and as every time we're looking to follow this process, we talk about, okay, you need to understand we need to recruit for this role, and we need to post that out. Now, there may be some candidates that might be better than you or that might have more experience that we're looking for. That's a risk that we need to take as a business and as the potential sponsored worker. So having that open dialogue with them. And then, as I mentioned before, the benchmarking. What are we doing in terms of salary and wage? Are they sitting at the $76,000 benchmark, or are they above that? How much more above that are they? And what does the company offer? So that was the discussions we've had, and making sure they've got a tailored onboarding program. So that, as we said before, the cultural understanding, the business understanding, the requirements of the role. So that's where we looked at it. What made it so successful is that out of all the candidates, what I like to do is I have a spreadsheet that I work through in terms of my skills shortage or my skills matrix list, and I'll put the candidates' names, and on each, so whether there's say 20 people that I've shortlisted for potential candidates for that position, then I'll have their hard skills, soft skills, and the role requirements as well with it. And then I put some components to see how much they make out of X number of, say there's 10 that are out there, or 20 points that I'm looking at, how much out of 20 do they achieve? And then I look at the, if let's just say they are still one of the key talents that we've had. Then we looked at the remuneration for that person. Yes, we know that they were previously on this salary. We've looked at the visa requirements and the sponsor requirements, and then we looked at the salary. And actually, in most cases, we found that the salary was higher anyway, regardless if they were going on a sponsorship or not. We just wanted to make sure we still did our due diligence to make sure that they were aligned with that remuneration. And that induction program was very important, especially to show that the commitment to that company, but also re-inducting them, even though they had been inducted, say, if they were previous workers. The new workers will always be inducted with the right frame of mind, right expectations, and so forth. What we learned, though, is by preparing it together, we made sure there was less delays in terms of the application. We set the expectations of the employer sponsorship requirements as well as the candidate sponsorship requirements to make sure, remember, you need to give us A, B, C, D. You need to do these particular tests to make sure we've got no delays in processing your application. I think we've had one where we had done, both Flora and myself had to make sure all the paperwork was prepared very quick and sharp, but it was the candidate having to do those particular medicals and the checks and everything else in their prior country requirements.
Yeah, and it's always so good to prepare early as well, because then when you present to full case and the case officer looks at assessing the visa application, they can just go, yes, this is a strong case, ABC is met, and they just push it right through. Whereas if you put an incomplete visa application in, there are requests for more information, and then there are certain delays for English tests, or I don't know, police checks, things like that. So I think generally it's always great to prepare all of the evidence ahead of time, and ensure that, and even just monitoring, that's what Maya and I are so good at as well. We monitor to see whether a visa application is outside of the standard processing team or processing time, and just see what you can do in a situation like that. Like we just spoke about this morning, what we can do to push those ones along. And normally there's always this idea that you can't push certain visa applications along and it's out of your hands. To a certain extent, it is out of your hands, but when you work with professionals like Maya and I, there's always a way that you can work around pushing things along.
Just a friendly nudge, as I like to call it. Another case study we had was where there was high turnover and we had a restaurant situation. As we know, one of the most biggest ones is restaurant situations that we've got. You're constantly churning in and out staff, and you're not really focusing on, I guess, the development is what I've noticed in the past. But what we did here, we looked at, okay, what does it need to be done in terms of looking for the staff and having longevity in that particular business. So we, again, planned the workforce. What is it that we need? How many people do we need? What do we need to do to then be able to look at retaining this particular restaurant manager in this business? So it was, how many staff do you need under you to make sure that you're not stressed, you're not burnt out, and all these kind of things to look at, okay, then we had these particular people that had been with the business and considered of potentially leaving, but we put a plan in place. We made sure that they were aligned to Fair Work, they have contracts, they have rosters. How did we track their leave? So there was a bit of that component, especially when it came to the visa requirements. But then we wanted to make sure that we aligned the visa nomination requirements to the company growth. And then we had the defining roles. So where does the restaurant manager start their tasks and finish their tasks? And then when do they get the other staff members to help them? So as we know, Flora, between yourself and I, long-term sponsorship does bring on the loyalty, the trust, they're more thankful for what they're doing and reduces the turnover in the end.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, because they are thankful for such a great opportunity at the business, but also to stay in Australia or to move to Australia. I know if, in the near future, if I get sponsored, I would definitely be thankful to my employer, and you want to basically make up for, what they've done for you. And in return, the employer gets a dedicated employee that is basically loyal to your business for all of the help that you've done, or even just for offering such an opportunity. Now, I guess we can touch on a little bit about how we work together and how we are able to deliver such successful outcomes and business growth for these employers.
Yes, so I'll touch a little bit about integrated people solutions, or as I call us, IPS. Is we talk about the planning. What does that take? What does it need in order for that business to be able to thrive? But what kind of evidence do we need to prepare for? So what kind of documentation, what we touched on today, making sure from a recruitment perspective, you've got all your ducks in the row, whatever else we need in terms of, as I said, email communication, correspondences forms quite an important part of that, and how we integrate that with Fair Work requirements. Are we ticking all the boxes from a Fair Work perspective? Looking at the cultural and the retention support, what kind of things can we put in place? Training, education. Sometimes it comes up to creating policies, reducing psychosocial hazards. There's so much that's got incorporated in that. But then looking at how we can continue growing those businesses. What other things do we need to put in play? Maybe work with third parties to make sure that you achieve all of those things that you're after as well.
Yeah, and at
And from
RSG,
yeah, I was going to say, and from RSG.
thank you, Maya. So from RSG, we do innovative, client-centric legal immigration solutions. So that means we focus on the clients here. We focus on the best outcome for the clients. It's not about you giving us instructions on which visa pathway you think that you might be best on. We actually work with you to find the actual best legal pathway for you to stay in Australia. And then we also work on talent acquisition. So this is global skills network that we use. So whether that would be working with employers to find the right skilled workers for certain vacant positions, or sometimes we work with clients as well to kind of just we vet you to make sure that, you fit in with the work culture of the business, and then include you into our database. And then we've got streamlined processes. So that's skills acquisition, but also visa immigration. We make it as easy as possible, so it doesn't seem like such a drag for the employer sponsor, but also not a drag for the visa applicant. Sometimes I often compare myself to a psychologist, but we reassure that, you're on the right path and we're here for you and we're going to help you get the best outcome that you can. And a lot of that is actually done through purpose-driven leadership and community collaboration. So we work with, amazing organizations such as Integrated People Solutions. I think that collaboration goes a really long way. RSG can't really work separately from IPS if we're trying to do human resource growth. There are certain clientele that we need to work together in order to even get a better outcome than if you were working with one company and another company and they don't have any synergy between them. And then lastly, it would be reputation and relationships. So through our global skills network, we're able to attract businesses, but also skilled workers through that relationship building that we've done. I know we've gone a couple minutes over, but I'd like to leave some time for questions if you don't mind, Maya.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does anybody have any questions? Perhaps you can either put it into the chat or you can put up your hand and unmute your mic.
Oh, just put it in the Q&A. I can read it out if that's helpful. Hello, Maya.
Yes. Hello, how are you?
Good.
Right,
yeah, so it's more to do with the work from home setup and what are the liabilities for the employer and the best way to navigate these.
Great question. I might touch on that one. So the working from home is where it's quite common in a lot of businesses to have that. And whether it's they're doing the work for you internationally or domestically, it's the same format. So making sure we've got the right setup in terms of that. But the biggest part is the policies and processes. So I like to make sure we've got working from home agreements, even if that's their full-time location of work. So we've got that covered from a space that, hey, you understand that you still need to follow the expectations of the business. You need to follow the rules and regulations. it's quite a detailed document in generally that we prepare to make sure that you're compliant in that. But we want to make sure that you're covered as a business owner to ensure that we mitigate as much risk. Hope that answers the question.
It does. So you mentioned, sorry, just quickly. So you mentioned overseas is also covered in that. So if you could just don't mind covering that,
yes.
because VA is a big part of young businesses.
Yes.
And how do you navigate that?
So VAs is a different situation towards the sponsoring of an employee. But in terms of that, it would be generally the point of making sure they're still set up correctly at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know the full extent of the relationship if it's an employability and the paid Australian wages and all that kind of stuff versus being a direct as a supplier. So they're a little bit different questions, but I'm happy to have that chat with you after here today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. And I believe we have some questions in the chat. Marvin asks, do you see overseas hiring as a short-term fix for skill shortages or a long-term workforce growth strategy? I'll let you touch on that a little bit.
For me, overseas hiring is always going to be, you're looking at how you're going to keep these people within Australia for the purpose of they're the right person, regardless if they are migrating to Australia or we're sponsoring them here. They should be part of your whole strategy. They could actually be one day, they might have come here on a visa for a couple of years and then they've showed leadership capabilities, they've showed what it takes to actually be further in that business. Absolutely see them as a long-term option for your business.
Yeah, and I think the goal is that they are a long-term workforce growth strategy as well, and not just a short-term fix. Because I think that if you're looking for short-term fix, you can definitely find that in the labor market, the local labor market. Just someone who can, if you're always rotating and hiring someone and letting them go and then hiring another person, that would be the fix. But I think with employer-sponsored visas, it's for that long term, someone to serve their loyalty for over years of experience with the business. We've got another question from Chris here. When considering employer-sponsored visas 482 or 186, what's your biggest uncertainty? Choosing the right pathway, managing timelines, or understanding eligibility?
I think I'll leave that one for you, Flora.
Thanks, Maya. There is no really biggest uncertainty. I think that, for example, when Maya and I, worked on those applications, we had to put all three of those into consideration. We had to choose the right pathway that was for the visa applicant. We had to manage the timelines because processing times for the 186 visa might be longer than the 482 visa, depending on the occupations. And then we also need to, understand the eligibility. So if the visa applicant is not eligible for the 186, I would never recommend the 186. If the 482 is less risky, we're sure that we can get them in for the next 2-3 years and then get them on a 186 pathway, I'd definitely recommend the one that's safer and secure. But then we would discuss all of the risks around, what if we do the 482 or what if we do the 186? And then all of those come into play. So you always need to choose what the best option is for the visa applicant.
And if I can add, I was going to say, Flora, Chris, what Flora and I have done in a previous one is the 482 was the initial one we've talked about, and we haven't put the 186 off the table. We've talked about, okay, let's get through this part first because this is one of the quickest and easiest way because we know this person. Sometimes they don't tell us in terms of, oh, I'm looking to be sponsored until the last crunch time and you're like, well, thanks for letting us know. However, this is the one we've chosen. What does that cost to the business? It is a bit more of a cost component to consider, but it's a worth doing component where we've gone 482 first, and then as time progresses, consider the 186 for the future of that particular person.
Yeah, and it's all about putting all of those and the workforce planning as well. If the visa applicant was offshore and you needed them to be onshore, you do the 482 as opposed to the 186. And Yeah, so definitely putting all of those components into play when we make those decisions. Marvin, I've just noticed your hand is up. Marvin, are you there? Oh, okay. All right. All good. We've got another question from Janelle. How does your organization currently forecast workforce needs, and what part of strategic workforce planning feels most challenging for you right now? I'll let you take the reins on that one, Maya.
Forecasting needs is never going to be a black and white answer, unfortunately. In terms of what it looks like, it will depend on the needs of that particular business. So, I like to say if you're forecasting year on year, you have an idea and you're pre-planning your business. First of all, does that person have a strategic business plan? If they don't, we need to start looking on supporting those employers on that. But essentially, it's okay. Well, I'm looking for this particular type of worker and this type of position, and I notice it's part of the skill shortage list, for example. Is there something that we can work with RSG or with IPS to look at how do we get those particular candidates in play? So when is the time? It is there is no start and finish time, but it's always something that you need to work on. In terms of like even just now, I generally tend to start forecasting more so now with my clients is, okay, what does your next year look like? Have you got a plan of what kind of person and skill you need? Do we have that already? Do we have people that are already on a visa that could potentially fit onto that one? And then how do we then align them? In terms of challenges, is when is the right time? I think that's the golden question. When do you do it? Remember, anything that you try to do within sponsoring somebody does take a long time. So it's not a 30 days and here's your application approval. It could take 3 months. I think the one that we've got now that we spoke about this morning, he's almost hitting onto what is it before it gets outside of the end date. I think it's like 90 days that we're almost hitting.
Yeah.
In terms of that. So, on average, you could have it between 60 and 120 days in terms of processing. But when do we actually start communicating with immigration and be like, hey, we put this submission some time ago? So when I guess, how long is a piece of string to answer that question? Sorry about that, Janelle, but it is that question itself is quite challenging to answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand as well, especially when there are so many nuances in the visa application and so many nuances in, the nomination application as well, proving genuine need or, the occupation and the roles and responsibilities underneath that. And then again, the unpredictability of how long it's going to take at the Department of Home Affairs for processing times as well. Tough question. Anybody else have any questions? If not, then we might just wrap it up here. Maya, any last remarks or notes?
I think we've covered quite a lot. So don't be alarmed that there is a lot of content was given today. There's a lot of examples. I mean, one size does not fit all. Think about what it is that you need, what is it that you want, and then think, well, do we have the right things in place for our business to be able to do this? So we're always here to feel free to reach out. Our details are up on the screen. It's been a pleasure, Flora, always working with you.
Thank you so much, Maya, for taking the time out today to join us. And we loved listening to all of your insights. They were very powerful. And I think it's just so important to have these conversations nowadays and have that transparency. And Maya and I are very open to having conversations with any one of you as well. So, on top of the people-centric solutions that we're constantly offering, we are open for conversations. If you have any future questions that you don't want to ask in this webinar, contact one of us and just open up that dialogue, see where we can help you or where we can fit in. Yeah. And thank you so much to all of our attendees. It's been a pleasure. Both Maya and I have a blast doing these things and have a blast chatting with each other. So thank you so much, Maya.
Thank you, everyone.